A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, we're talking to Family Voice Australia Queensland State Director Andrew McColl. The Queensland state elections on this weekend, with much speculation about the likely change of government. Andrew McColl, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good morning, Neil, and good morning, listeners.
Andrew, let's just start with that. There is a lot of speculation. A change of government may be on the way for Queensland. It looks as though the LNP is about to take a victory on Saturday. I imagine that, everybody would be a little bit tentative about how this result might look. How are you feeling about it?
Well, there are lots of people speculating that that's going to be the case, and people have done their surveys and talked to people, of course, and that's coming, of course, Saturday. But before we get to the voting side of it, Neil, I thought it's good for us to try and consider elections and public figures and public policy in terms of what the Bible teaches us about the Christian responsibility. And I recently came across a podcast by the Church and Family Life on the 14th of this month, where they're pretty concerned about what's happening over in the US. And they make this statement: when civil rulers spurn God's law, Christians have a duty to speak. That's the clear testimony of Scripture. Throughout history, faithful heralds of righteousness have called out civil magistrates for committing evil deeds and enacting laws repugnant to God's moral order. Think of Elijah before King Ahab and John the Baptist before Herod. The need is no less great today. Now, this was such an outstanding podcast. I want to use a number of quotes from it during our session this morning. So now what I'm thinking is that first thing is that Christians must use the tools that are available to us. And there are lots of tools, of course, as you were kind of alluding earlier to the means of modern technology. They are amazing. So we thank the Lord for that, and we want to use those tools. And what I also can quote from this podcast again is that God intends his people, the church, to go and tell the other sphere of authority, meaning civil government, what is God's standard of right and wrong. Because if we don't, who will? And what then is to be the basis of their laws? It's going to be their own imagination. And if they won't open the Bible, we must tell them what's in the Bible.
And of course, it's the sort of challenge, isn't it, that we always reflect on ahead of a election, and that is, will the Christian community even take the opportunity that's there to use the technological tools that are available to be able to understand Christian positions on the policy positions that both sides will be presenting? And you know what, it could be challenging, maybe it's disheartening, but I'm not sure as many Christians are actually doing some basic research into the policies of both sides before they're actually casting their vote. What's your encouragement as we get into, we're going to talk about some of the issues, but what's your encouragement to Christian believers to take advantage of these technological tools that are available? I'm going to talk about the Australian Christian Values Checklist, and of course there are other sites. There's a site specially set up by the Australian Christian Lobby. But these sorts of sites give an opportunity for Christians to be able to check where the Christian position comes in contrast to what the values of the political parties are. What's your encouragement to believers to actually really take a little bit of opportunity to check where their values lie?
Well, certainly those things are important, but even before we get to that, Neil, and I am coming to that, the church must recognise, and Christians as a whole, we must regain our confidence to confront and instruct our political representatives and councils, like our local councils, about their roles. Now, what is their role according to Scripture? Well, the Bible tells us in Romans 13 verse 4 that they are to be a minister of God to you for good. So we begin by praying for those in civil government, which the Bible tells us to do, And we must be willing to challenge them on matters of evil. That is, those things that are in breach of God's commandments, reminding them that you are God's servants. You cannot do these things, for they are evil. We understand that they're laid down. These are not secular and sacred. They're actually spheres of responsibility that the God of creation has laid down to be observed and obeyed by everyone. Now, as you were mentioning earlier, Neil, I had the privilege recently of joining in a panel that was convened by Warwick Marsh from the Australian Christian Values to edit the ACV checklist, dealing with the values of the political parties seeking our votes for this Saturday's election. You can locate this document by just Googling Australian Christian Values and scrolling down to the Queensland election chart. This is made up of 20 questions dealing with fundamental moral and ethical issues that all Christians should be concerned about. It was compiled by an independent team of analysts after an exhaustive search of party websites, voting history and statements. So there's quite a bit of detail in there, Neil, about what all of our parties are talking to us about and what they are expressing are their actual written down values and priorities.
I might say that this document is produced before each election and has been for many, many, many years. And if you're looking for something that will give you a guide, a level of trustworthiness, that Australian Christian Values checklist will be very useful. You've been looking at some of the issues on there. There's 18 issues on that Christian Values checklist, and it's really a lot of wisdom from a lot of contributors boiled down to a single page. And you might think, are they partisan in all of this? Well, I think you'll discover that that there's a contrast between 5 parties: Family First, the DLP, the Liberals, the Labor Party and the Greens. And they're the ones that appear on the Australian Christian Values checklist. Out of those, you've identified some that are grouped together, and I'll get your thoughts here. When we talk about protecting the life and saving our children, where do you think these ones are around the abortion issue? Abortion's become quite a significant issue in this campaign.
Well, it certainly has. And so there are 3 questions, actually questions 1, 2 and 3 dealing with abortion. First one is dealing with save our children and stop the taking of innocent lives, oppose abortion. The second one is providing medical care for babies born alive in an abortion. And thirdly, to reject abortion bills being administered by nurses and midwives. So there's 3 out of 20 questions that are dealing directly with the matter of abortion. I'm pleased to note that there are a number of parties that are standing for election, or their candidates are standing for election this Saturday. Family First and the Katter's Australian Party, One Nation, and the LNP. Now, the LNP are a bit wobbly on that one. They haven't, as you know, you would have heard recently of David Crisafulli mentioning that he is pro-abortion, but there are quite a lot of people in the LNP who would not agree with their leader on that. So thankfully, we've got Family First, Katter Party and One Nation who are wholly coming out saying, yes, we want to stop abortion. The Labor Party and the Greens do not. They are 100% in favour of abortion and of a woman's so-called right to choose. So there's our first main question there, Neil, as we get started on this one.
Abortion has been brought to the fore, and you've got leaders who are debating abortion. You've got Stephen Miles, the Premier, who is basically pro-abortion and really has led a charge there for what would describe as the worst abortion laws in the world, abortion right up to birth. But the alternative, the opposition leader, Crisafulli, he hasn't necessarily shown his hand fully here. I wonder if you've got any perspective on where, one of those guys will be a Premier beyond Saturday, about where they might be standing on this abortion issue?
Well, it seems to me, as I was saying, Neil, that he's coming out in favour of abortion, but what he hasn't really acknowledged is that the party system and the parliament means that if he's got a pretty lively backbench who are challenging him on that, and he has to then give the party the conscience vote, or the members of parliament a conscience vote. I'm pleased to see that the Katter Party and One Nation, now Katter Party presently have 4 seats, One Nation doesn't have any in the Queensland Parliament. So at least there are some alternatives there, with Family First as well, who are also running candidates in most, if not all, of our seats in Queensland. So that they are some parties that are up there willing to put their hand up. And so thankfully there are some alternatives there of genuine parties who want to stop abortion in Queensland.
They are minor parties, and our preferential voting system allows an opportunity to be able to put a 1 in the box of a minor party that actually supports your Christian values. That'll be important.
Yes.
Let me just say, so Family First is on this Australian Christian Values checklist, as is Katter's Australian Party. One Nation is on there, the LNP, the Labor Party and the Greens. Now, the way the checklist looks to me, it's a single 1 page, and there's 20 issues on there. And then there's a series of green ticks and red crosses. Is that a good way of actually being able to assess who believes what?
Well, it really is. Now, there were some questions where we have not been able to get definitive answers, and even the party themselves were not sure. For instance, the LNP, I mean, out of 20 questions, I've got about 8 or 9 where there's a question mark because they simply haven't made up their mind, or it's something that's on an individual basis, or it's on the basis of how the question is going to be defined. As you'd understand, there are lots of ways questions can be defined, when they come to the parliament. So the LNP has numbers of things where it's kind of sitting on the fence. Now, I went through this list recently, Neil. I basically graded them from bottom to top in values. So starting with the worst, we have the Greens and the Labor Party on 7.5%, the LNP on 62.5%, One Nation at 80%, the Katter Party came in at 97.5%, and Family First on 100%. Congratulations, Family First.
Okay, so, there is a way of looking at those parties, those green ticks, red crosses, and thank you for clarifying. Where there's a question mark, it means that the party has not been able to settle on a particular place in those particular moral values. And as you say, and just to reflect here on the LNP, who are expected to win on Saturday, as you say, there's lots of question marks, and they've had a sort of a small target strategy. They haven't wanted to put themselves out there and name where they are, but as Christians, we want them to name where they are, don't we? We want them to be accountable for some of those moral issues.
Well, we do, Neil, and the other thing that can be mentioned here is because the Katters presently have 6 seats, 4 seats in the parliament. They're running more candidates this election, so there's a possibility of them winning 6 or even 7 seats post Saturday. So there is a certain potential that the Katters could be, or the LNP could be looking at talking to the Katters about a coalition type arrangement. Now, whether that works out or not, none of us really know. Yes, it's probable that the LNP will win themselves in their own right, but there's still a chance, and I'm going to say probably 10%, that the Katter Party might be called upon by the LNP for some assistance in forming government.
Well, in looking at that Australian Christian Values checklist, the Katter Party, wherever there's a candidate, looks like a pretty good deal for putting a 1 in their square. Hey, we've been talking about the abortion issue, and we talk about that a lot. Some people think it's not important. Of course, it has a preeminence of importance, protecting life, and where the parties stand on that. Other issues that you've identified, issues 5, 6 and 15 on that list, dealing with gender dysphoria. What are you drawing attention to here? Who's got a green tick and who's got a red cross?
Well, what we know is that the LNP are generally in favour of that kind of thing, of not encouraging radical gender ideology. The Labor Party and the Greens are definitely wanting to promote radical gender ideology. They're not interested in what you and I would consider protecting children. The other matters are dealing with supporting the birth certificate integrity, whereby children are, if they are biologically male or female at birth, they should be left that way on their birth certificate. And the third part was to deal with supporting a public inquiry into the treatment of gender dysphoria, something which is absolutely going to be essential, not just in Queensland, but all around Australia, as health departments have embraced the most astonishing points of view when it comes to dysphoria, and saying, well, if the 14-year-old girl or the 14-year-old boy, hey, look, they think there's something else, well, let's just run with that and let them have the surgery, let them have puberty blockers. As you know, it's just something which is just beyond awful. And so we want to see changes come in that regard. Thankfully, Family First, Katter Party and One Nation are certainly giving us ticks on that one in terms of a pro-family and a pro-life position, protecting children who have got some confusion about their gender from surgery or puberty blockers, and saying, hey, look, if you're born a boy, you are a boy. If you're born a girl, you are a girl, and nobody can change that. Yes, people can do surgery on you, but a girl can never become a boy, and a boy can never become a girl.
Now, the current Queensland Labor government has had, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, a radical agenda and a radical program of bringing in those sorts of left-wing reforms, and talking around the issues of abortion, talking about these issues of gender dysphoria. Some people are wondering if there is any sort of alternative, because the Liberal Party is so non-committal on some of these areas that people might be wondering, will anything change? Those parties like Family First or Katter's Australian Party or One Nation that have got a lot of green ticks, is there any guarantee that they'll actually have some sort of a program of trying to move towards reform and repeal of some of those sorts of laws?
Well, I certainly think that they want to do that, but once again, it comes back to what the voters vote for, Neil. The Katter Party do have a record for wanting to protect children from dysphoria and protect them from all of the things we just talked about, surgery and hormonal treatment, and that they've been quite open about that in the Parliament and at that time they've had people scorning them in the Parliament with that position. Now, so yes, there are thankfully Family First, Katter's parties, Katter Australian Party and One Nation are definitely strong on those ones. The Labor Party and the Greens are not. So all of those things, even things like supporting a ban on drag queen story time and sexually explicit books, these are things that you and I would think, look, these are important things. We want to protect children, and the Bible teaches us about protecting children. And that includes such things as a very explicit information and in public texts, in public libraries, and of course the whole thing about drag queens, which small children do find quite confusing.
Okay, there is a scenario that you raised. If there is a minority LNP win, and there is the coalition, perhaps with Family First or a Katter's Australian Party or even One Nation, that actually may be a positive for where values might be addressed, rather than even the LNP winning in their own right because they're so non-committal. Is that the possible scenario there? As you say, there could be some sort of formation of government. There could be a balance of power for the Katters or One Nation or Family First as a possibility in the mix there. That sounds like a positive for these sorts of values.
I would say so, yes. Now, I would say that the possibilities of that happening based on the polls that I've seen there would probably be under 20%. But hey, look, let's have some surprises. I mean, we like the idea of nice surprises, and that'd be a great one. And that, I think that's when we'd see whether it's the Family First, whether it's the Katters, whether it's One Nation, teaming up to put some pressure on the coalition, on the LNP. I think that will be a very positive thing. And let's face it, these are the parties that are committing themselves firmly to a pro-life position. Well, these are the ones who I want to vote for and openly do so, and because they need, we would be so much better off having pro-life, pro-family, and pro-God people in our parliament now.
Okay, well, for listeners to check out where the green ticks are and where the red crosses are, you might want to check that Australian Christian Values Checklist. You'll be able to get a link at Family Voice's website, familyvoice.org.au, but you might go straight to that website, christianvalues.org.au, and access that one page. And if you're not really the sort of person who does research into how you vote, as a Christian, this might be a very important one to check out. christianvalues.org.au. Andrew McColl is the Queensland State Director for Family Voice Australia. Andrew, thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.